Hello, everybody. This is the DBC Community Show. My name is Michael, and I'll be your host, and we'll be speaking with the various members of the Dragonboat community that make Canada such a rich hub for the sport we love. Dragonboat's success is often credited with the ease with which beginners can get a taste for racing. This might even be truer for athletes with disabilities, a community that IDBF would like to see grow, starting with the inclusion of a para-racing category at the next World Championships. Joshua Simmonds is a paddler I've gotten to know in the past few years, hailing from the 22 Dragons Club. He is also legally blind and has stepped up to lead the para national team. So I wanted to find out more about how he's come in touch with a beloved sport, what the sport brought to him, and what he hopes to give back to it. This is Josh Simmonds.
All right, we're live.
Great.
Joshua Simmonds, thank you for joining us on the Dragonboat Canada podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
As always, let's start the conversation at the beginning. And in your case, I feel that to really get to know you and your involvement in the sport, we have to actually start before the sport is part of your life. Let's get this out of the way. Retinitis pigmentosa, is that right?
That's right.
Explain to the viewers what exactly this is, why this is important to you, and when did you start noticing this?
Well, if you want to go that far back, it's actually in vivo, in the womb, because it's a genetic condition.
Okay.
So we're going way back.
Way back.
Stone Age. That's when I was born. So yeah, it's a genetic condition that touches on certain types of DNA coding and proteins in vitro. It's a class of conditions that makes up a lot of variations of it. So it's an umbrella name for a little subtle differences for each person's kind of condition of retinitis pigmentosa.
Okay.
There's about 80 different types of retinitis pigmentosa they're finding out, and they're going through some gene therapies right now.
Okay.
But by and large, my retinitis pigmentosa, I began experiencing, from what I've been told, about 7 or 8 years old. And it really meant that trick-or-treating was difficult at night. Transitioning from a light room to dark room was more difficult, and my field of vision was always fairly narrow. Mm-hmm. It didn't really interfere with much of my life until the past 10 years, okay. Where over the past 10 years or so, it's a progressive disease. So it does deteriorate over time and affects the rods and cones of your eyes. So your central vision is what deteriorates over time, and then it slowly becomes a narrower field. So when anyone is talking with me, they get my undivided attention because I have no choice.
Right.
And so as it stands right now, I use the assistance of a cane to get around. But by and large, by looking at me, you probably couldn't tell too much that I have too much of a difficulty, but it does qualify me to be under the classification as being legally blind.
You mentioned how it didn't really affect you until the last 10 years. One of the questions I had lined up was what kind of sport participation did you do prior to Dragonboat? So does that mean that before getting involved in Dragonboat, and as far as I can tell, you started more or less around 2010, 11, somewhere around there. So prior to that, you were able to do, did you do other sports? And I guess that your vision didn't affect you sufficiently to really bother you in those realms?
It did affect me with certain sports. So fast moving things that needed to have a wider field of vision, like badminton, mm-hmm. I wasn't quite quick enough to pick up because my field of vision was too limited at that closer range on a badminton area. But I didn't participate in sports. I participated in sports. I was going to say I didn't participate in sports in the orthodox way. I made it work for me. I was very active in sports. It was probably my best subjects through elementary and high school. I wasn't much of a scholastic kid, so I usually made it work for me. So I was always the last person back. So I played goalie. in soccer and floor hockey, where my field of vision didn't come into as much of a problem, and my lack of regard for my own physical well-being made me very well suited to those types of positions. So I was involved in a lot of stuff like that. I did a lot of coaching prior to coaching of soccer, specifically before getting into dragon boating. So after I finished doing high school and a little bit of CJAP, my 20s and 30s, I did a lot of coaching in my area, from boys and girls 12 to 18 at various recreational and competitive levels. And then I just transitioned to dragon boating because a nurse at a hospital thought it might be a good thing for me to be involved in, because it was a fun community.
That's a perfect segue. I want to know, how did you get involved into the sport? And so it's just a random coincidence that somebody had mentioned it to you.
Yeah, a nurse. I was doing a stage at the Jewish General Hospital Department of Inpatient Psychiatry, and a nurse who was a part of a breast cancer survivor team said I should be involved in it. She thought it was a good group. She knew Matt Roberts. She knew both Matts, Matt Roberts, Matt Smith at 22 Dragons. And that was early on, perhaps in the early 2000s. And I got involved that way. That was the segue that I needed. I was involved with teams that were recreational teams that were part of a hospital community, like Royal Victoria Hospital at the time, which had its own site separately. And I just kind of progressed through various types of recreational teams over 15 years, and found my way to more competitive due to my own interest and due to my age. It gets to be more narrow. The 40 plus, 50 plus categories offer a competitive age group which I could compete for. I don't think I was ever at the ability to compete at a premier category, no matter how, at any point, because my paddling was never that good. But I was able to kind of make a decent attempt at national team trials and such, and to be on some competitive teams for the club in the senior A and senior B categories.
First of all, I want to point out that I had never appreciated that you've been in the sport for so long. You said 15 years. My questions is, if we think back to the beginnings of sports, you took your time developing through the various levels of competitiveness. And this is also more or less as your vision starts to become to hamper you a little bit more. You had mentioned that it had started about 10 years ago. How do you remember it affecting you, or was it? Do you remember what were the growing pains of figuring out this new sport?
That's a great question. I was attracted to dragon boating initially, as I mentioned, because it was a community and it was a sport. And so I needed something to balance my personal life and my work life. So as my vision has deteriorated over the years, it was a very comfortable transition. Well, primarily because the community is so easygoing, and I mean that across the ages. So it really wasn't difficult to make that adjustment, being in a stationary position and only really having to see, within a meter in front of you at the most. Made it a great transition for me over the past few years. And being in the senior A, senior B type of categories now, the type of coaching and the kind of people around you, there's all kinds of people dealing with their own kinds of physical or sensory issues as we get older. So it's been a good serendipitous type of thing in my vision kind of coming down, but also being in an age group with people that have made it very accommodating. And the coaching, I find dragon boating, because it's not, I've never seen it part of the mainstream. It's had its heyday 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, had the golden age of dragon boating, and you had to fit within a mold. But that's kind of progressed, where dragon boating, I find, you don't necessarily have purists in the same way. I find dragon boating is really often about accommodating and trying to get the most out of whatever your body can do. I think that doesn't necessarily quite come up as in the U24s and the premiers quite as much, because their bodies are fantastic pieces of engineering at the earlier age and they can get a lot out of it. But I find coaching and the higher age categories start to become more flexible in how they try and make whatever you have going for you fit within the sport.
And which is great, because it allows such a wide variety of people to continue getting their competitive itch taken care of as they progress. You mentioned you're balancing your personal life and your work life, and that's a good segue, because I want to take a bit of a tangent. For the people who don't know you, you are a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist? Psychology, right. And so I think you could offer a unique perspective through the lens through your personal lens. Anything in particular that you've noticed that about what makes a good coach?
I've had, what made me better is being with better athletes and being with good coaches, and being in a very good club of 22 Dragons, and being on national team tryouts, beginning to be around some very good coaches. What would be some of the common denominators?
Something you've noticed specifically from a psych point.
From a psychological perspective, that does help. Thank you. I think being good communicators really helps. I think good coaches are very good communicators. I think they know how to speak to an individual as well as a group very fluidly. People that speak a truth, like there's a certain genuineness to them that you want to get behind. And those that are looking to collaborate with you to try and bring out your best. I think those that are looking that really do have your best interest at heart, more than just on a team basis because they're self-serving and they want to win, which is understandable. I mean, you're a coach and you're part of a community and you have obligations, but really do looking at your own personal growth. That's some of the factors that I found extremely powerful and have been a common denominator through the coaches I've been with.
That is great, and I just can't help but nod in agreement. I really love the way that you put that into words. That desire to, like, almost I feel like as a coach I'm trying to achieve the best version of myself through my ability, through my attempts at helping you achieve the best out of yourself. So yeah, no, thank you for those wonderful comments. I want to poke a little bit of fun. I know that for those who have you on social media, you love making Freud-based jokes. Do you practice any psychoanalysis?
No, that takes. I've had the pleasure of having been in psychoanalysis as a patient over a number of years at a point in my life. So I've been on the receiving end in that way, which has been a very special type of intimate experience. But the training involved for that, I have not gone through. That takes many years of dedication to go through. I like to think that I am perhaps psychoanalytic, psychodynamically minded, and it definitely influenced my clinical work and my life in general. My approach would best be termed as eclectic, in that I don't subscribe to a particular theory. I like to think that I understand a lot of theories, and I try and use what I know to help best complement that individual. So best way to kind of think about it is that I don't impose my theories on the person. I try and bring to clinically to the session what I think best represents the person, and use those theories in conjunction.
If you don't mind me throwing a bit of a curveball, but something that I have just recently stumbled on and would be super curious to know your thoughts on. I think I only found 2 papers relating this to sports, but it's the idea of terror management theory and mortality salience, and how this could actually help improve sports performance. So it was something along the lines of as a way. So terror management theory was something saying how if confronted with something scary, basically you will dig your heels deeper into what you feel are like the big values in your life. So something along the lines of like, if people say verbally that generosity is something of importance, then when you remind them of the inevitability of death, and then you ask them about and then later on ask them to donate something, they'll tend to donate more because they've been recently reminded. That's a mortality salience part. They've been recently reminded of the impermanence of life, and then they dig their heels deeper into this idea that like a value that I believe is strong is generosity. I should really live up to that, and they'll make a point of doing it. And so somebody decided to test this out with athletes that for whom the idea of being strong was something, a value that they held strongly. And when I forget how exactly they went about creating the mortality salience, but when reminded of the inevitability of death, and then given a grip strength test, they were gripping stronger than the average athlete. And then later on, somebody else did another kind of test where they took a bunch of basketball players. And again, basketball players obviously value their skill as basketball players. And when they did the mortality salience test on a subset of athletes, they tended to play. According to the subjective vision of the coaches, these athletes played better when given something that was saliency of mortality prior to playing a game. So I'm not entirely sure where I want to go with this, but I'm just curious, how do you respond to hearing this idea?
Well, it's an interesting theory, to say the least. I have to preface it by sports psychology is a specialized area that I am not. I'm not specialized in that area by any means. So my thoughts are strictly from a clinical perspective or my own personal perspective. But I have to give respect to those that deal with it from a sports psychology perspective, who may come at it a different angle. But what I'm hearing is that it does lean into the idea of seizing the moment or being in the now, that you become more focused on knowing that you're using your skills in your moment in this moment, and that there is nothing afterwards that you can control. And because I mean, if you're looking at it from an existential perspective, I guess afterwards it's over. Like, this is the moment to be in the zone, if you will. So to hyper focus, to give as much effort as you can on that strength grip, to paddle as hard as you can at that competition, because there's nothing else afterwards. And it's not to be bleak about it, but it's really to seize the moment and enjoy the now, enjoy life, and to really be present.
Marvelous. Thank you, Josh. Okay, back to the world of Dragonboat. So I'm thinking through the years, and I'll start off with 2013. Caravella is first created. So for those who don't know, at 22 Dragons, Caravella is our blind and partially sighted team. And I believe you got involved with it pretty from the beginning, or not long after.
I was involved with it more as kind of a paddler, kind of helping it along. A lot of the work that went into it should be given to Annie Gouveia,
Yes.
who is a vision rehabilitation specialist.
Former paddler.
Yeah, former paddler, married to a former paddler, married to a very good former paddler, Brian Lee. And so she has it in her blood, and she wanted to create through the Vision Rehabilitation Center an outlet for people who are going through senses of vision loss as a psychosocial outlet for people, because the accessibility of various sports is somewhat limited to people with disabilities. So she wanted to create something that people who were in the process of, transitioning with their sight, or people who didn't have access at all to sports, can be part of a community. And as to your point early on, that dragon boating does present itself at its core a community. So using its strength to propel it in the idea of rehabilitation and sport, it was used to create, for the past few years now, a blind vision impaired team, which does incorporate some people more and more now who are beyond the spectrum of vision impairment. We're starting to incorporate, perhaps moving forward, to a more diversified type of impairments, whether it be hearing or physical, but at its genesis, it has been, and probably still is, vision impaired. And my role of it has evolved to being a paddler kind of helper, to now coaching it with Annie, as it's been involved in maybe like 4 or 5 years easily now. And it's been a wonderful experience.
What are some of the things that, since generally coaches tend to be sighted, what are some of the things that a sighted coach could emphasize when working with people that have some level of vision impairment, or on the flip side, things that sighted coaches tend to forget to think about?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. There was kind of like, what are some of the hallmarks, or what are some of the best practices that a coach can use, whether or a paddler can utilize? And I think this could probably be said for any division, but even when it comes to people with disabilities, through the various committees that I've been on recently with para of the national team and para committee of the Dragonboat Canada, mm-hmm. one of the bigger conceptualizations is, well, how can there be a best dialogue? What does the coach need to know about me, pros and cons about this sport, and what does the coach who knows about the sport need to share with the paddler? And how does that dialogue create an understanding of not just the disability, but what those unique needs are? So there are some best practices that we're trying to share, and the best one is communication, mm-hmm. Which is already, as I mentioned, what makes a good coach is communication in general. How do you communicate yourself well to a group and individual? I think that it isn't just the responsibility of the coach to be the know-it-all of all conditions. They have to be mature, they have to be thoughtful, and they have to be a good communicator and understand safety issues primarily, more than anything. And the paddler themselves can't go in expecting that the coach is going to be a specialist in everything, in their particular conditions. So I think it's important of a collaboration for both parties to be responsible, that there doesn't need to be an expert per se. The coach is an expert in dragon boating, and the paddler who has disability is an expert in themselves. in their own disability, how do they convey to each other where they're coming from? And how do they find an understanding to best meet the needs of the sport?
I love it, and I already saw where you were going with when you were talking about each person has their expertise and they have to share it to each other. I love how that reinforces this idea that communication, a good communicator as a coach, it's not a one-way thing. It's not just about me being able to transmit to you information, but it's also about me being able to open enough to receive information from you, information that I am not able to have. A coach mentor that I've had in the past once said something along the lines of the athlete can feel, but he doesn't see, and the coach sees, but he can't feel. And these are two different, neither of those is inherently a better way of knowing than the other. They're just different, and they should be combined. And so if me as a coach, I want to understand you, I need to understand how you feel, and I'm only going to know that as you communicate it back to me. So I really love the way that you put that together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think very good coaches who work with athletes who have an impairment or disability make excellent coaches with quote unquote normal populations. And I mean, I suspect I'm not a coach at a high level and by any means, but I suspect it's a very humbling experience. And some of the best coaches that I've been at so far have been ones that are able to kind of be humble and really come at it from the perspective they don't know everything, but they're very good in what they do know, and good about finding out what they don't know. But again, I think what I'm trying to do is dispel some of the stigma of maybe coaches not wanting to perhaps be with paddlers with a visible or hidden disability, and that they're probably already dealing with a lot of athletes who do have some type of impairment but don't even realize it, and that it actually makes you a better coach by sheer fact of what you've just said.
Completely agree. You can only grow with challenge, right? So if you want to really push your abilities as a communicator, there's no better opportunity, I think. We've gone through so I've talked about 2013 in Caravella. Now let's move forward. 2014, you will compete in Ravenna but not with 22 Dragons. Now you're going to be competing with Dragon Zone. You're going to be competing on at the international level, I believe, for the first time for you, and with the entire team of visually impaired athletes. Talk to me about that experience, about 2014 Club Cruise Ravenna and all that entails.
Yeah, you've done your homework, Mike. That's exactly right. That year, I offered myself to be involved with a team that had vision impairment, and although the correction is that some of them did and some of them didn't have a vision impairment, so I think it was about 50-50.
Okay.
But I went over to Vancouver a couple of times, and they were going to qualify. Well, they had already qualified to go over to Ravenna, practice with them. Some other people were from Toronto, but they were primarily based in Vancouver. Yeah. Traveled with them, and it was a fantastic experience internationally. There were only a few teams there that were in that category, but being a part of that experience really gave you an understanding of what an international event looks like, how it unfolds, and how to be prepared for it mentally and physically. It was a great experience. I highly recommend it to anyone to try and to go to a club crew. It's special.
And indeed, it won't be the end of the road for you, because after that, I know that helped to ignite some desire for trying out for the national team, and then later on you'll have a chance to compete at a club cruise a second time in 2018 in Szeged with 22 Dragons. What is there anything in particular that you remember, that a lesson that you had picked up from 2014 that paid off in 2018?
Yeah, dealing with jet lag, dealing with logistics because you're never right next to where things are, dealing with a team that has mobility issues in terms of their senses, logistics and everything needs to be really well planned out. So for me personally, I was very well prepared in getting my act together, because I knew there was a lot of things that needed to happen before, waking up in the morning, then getting to the site. So being on time, being prepared, getting mentally in the zone, the long times between races, that was something was to be expected. And the general feel was really incredible. There were definite parallels being European, Italy and Hungary. Each were obviously different in their own right, the culture. But I wasn't at the second time around with a team with a disability. I was with just the senior A group, and we did very well. Yes. in a small boat. We did very well. I mean, we were very close to within golds. We did silver and bronze in the 200 and 500 respectively. Yeah. And it was pretty incredible. The Europeans, and in Hungary in particular, really do care a lot about their water sports. So the facilities that were on and that were available, and the maintenance, particularly in Hungary, of their waterway was really well done, and it was very well attended and televised. They really care about their water sports. So it was going big leagues for sure. And I can remember just in passing that I felt as though we looked like a bit of a ragtag crew, because we look a bit different. We're different ethnic groups, I guess. In our boat, we're from Canada, or different shapes and sizes, and the groups were more uniform out of Hungary and out of Russia, and they were all brute Olympians, big guys. So when you come out of a boat and you're a ragtag crew who technically know how to put the game together, and have the power to put it behind it, to walk off and look behind you and realize that you've beaten guys that, again, are ex-Olympians, it's a pretty powerful thing when you get shaken a hand with a Russian bear paw of a man who you've beaten. It does a lot for your self-esteem. That's all I can say. It's really special. Yeah, I'd recommend it to anyone. And there were plenty of races we did which we didn't, and other crews that I was a part of that didn't medal, but it was, again, very special, and you knew that you were part of a group, part of a community that were communally trying to get together to make something special. And I'll mention in passing that it so happened that I think 22 Dragons won the Club Cup in Szeged. So 22 Dragons, just a bit of another plug there for them. That year, we came away with the club championships, that we won enough points that represented the best club in the world, which is pretty amazing.
It certainly was. And I still remember, like, you guys had just gone into the docks after the 500 meter small boat final, and I had just confirmed that you guys got third place, and so I ran up to you guys and I pulled out my fingers, and you guys were so happy. And one thing that it makes me think of is how, like, I know that because it's still a relatively new thing, I sometimes feel that people sort of poo-poo small boat as being like the the weird cousin of the real sport, which is the big boat. But having seen, like, you guys are one example of the kind of a fulfillment that you can still get from racing in small boats. What matters is that if the races felt good and the races were competitive, regardless of if it's a big boat or small boat, the wins still feel just as good, and the competition still feels just as fulfilling.
No, absolutely, yeah, for sure. I have to mention, though, within the context of being still a para athlete, I mean, getting to and from marshalling and whatnot, I mean, I always had my cane on me. Everyone flops down their shoes, more or less, or whatever personal effects before they get into the boat. Mm-hmm. So I fold up my cane and I put it to the side, and then all of a sudden I become a paddler like anyone else, right? So there's no real distinction. But when I get off the boat, I'm putting my arm on the back of someone just to make sure I get up the marshalling area properly and don't take a swim prematurely. And that's not just from the members of the crew. That if I'm wandering around, I'll have numerous people come up to me and ask me if I need any support or need any help getting around. So to anyone who has a disability that they feel as if they want to hide, dragon boating is generally a fairly welcoming community. I mean, there's always going to be people that are not nice. I mean, but I would say that by and large, whether it be from my own club or other clubs, getting around to and from things logistically, it was really wonderful. So people were really making sure that I was helped in the way that I needed. So yeah,
that's so good to hear. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's a good segue into the final question I have. We can't ignore your latest role, as you had mentioned, program director of the Para Dragons team. The IDBF has recently announced that there will be a Para Dragonboat category at the next World Championships. Fingers crossed that it'll happen. But yeah, once it was created, we Dragonboat Canada immediately got to work on fielding a national team for that category. You ended up being chosen as our program director. I guess the first question I have to ask is, how did you react to the announcement that IDBF was going to create a category for the Para Dragons at the World Championships, and what do you hope to bring to this program?
I'm delighted. I hope it's a trickle-down effect. I hope it goes from top down, where the national team can trickle down to more at a provincial and regional and local events, that they could be seen as an untapped resource that can permeate throughout the Dragonboat community. So I was delighted to hear, delighted I could give back in some way with what I know. It's a fledgling program. I think only in 2018 it was initialized, and Canada didn't participate in the first one. It was kind of the last minute thing that IDBF seemed to put together. So we wanted to kind of make sure everyone was safe and it was done right. So we waited until getting it put forward in 2021, and here we are. I am delighted to be a part of it. I'm hoping to put things down which will help create a legacy for the program moving forward. As a program director and a paddler, and it's been very well received. We are getting registrations. I would always encourage people to still look at the DBC website to apply, to see what it's all about. There is a PowerPoint presentation put on the Dragonboat Canada Para National Team to kind of get you oriented. So we're very enthusiastic. Again, fingers crossed. And it's been very well received. And the other national team directors are looking at the program not as a second class kind of charity. It is a program like any other, and it is seen as deserving any kind of attention as any other. And it's been very well received by the top, by the other program directors and other paddlers that are sharing their experiences and want to be a part of paddlers with or without a disability with another program. So a senior C program person who wants to also try out can do so as a paddler with or without a disability. So I think we're going in some new territory that hasn't been looked at before, but I can't think of a better sport that would be welcoming this type of thing, again, based on a community, from a community basis.
I love a lot of the points that you brought up. I like how you mentioned the idea that it doesn't feel like a charity case, and that really hits home. I remember there was this, I think it was an advertisement for the 2012 Paralympics, and one of the things, one of the slogans that was used was "Sports doesn't care," and you mentioned, like, once you get into the boats, you're no longer somebody that was that had a visual impairment. You were an athlete as everybody else. You had earned your spot like everybody else, and you were going to experience it the way that everybody else, the highs and lows of competition, just as anybody else. And so this national team having the opportunity to hopefully give that experience to plenty of others, I think is absolutely great, and I can't think of a better person to help spearhead this. I think your own story shows how one participation can snowball into another, and can really ignite something within people to go to aim higher. And so I totally share your hopes for this to have a legacy, and to be able to result in some good trickle down kind of results. Josh?
Yeah, me too. Mm-hmm.
Josh, it's been absolutely great to speak with you. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed the questions and you asking me. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you. Have a good day.